Right. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. In our recent Tech Bytes episodes, we've spoken about why AI initiatives struggle and, more about leadership, intent, and clarity. Today's conversation is about what happens after the tools are enabled, why Copilot adoption stalls, why productivity gains don't always show up, and how organizations turn AI into daily repeatable value. To explore that, we've joined by someone who has spent decades inside the Microsoft ecosystem, not just building expertise, but also enabling people and communities to succeed. Dan Rey is a longtime Microsoft MVP, a community leader, a practitioner with deep experience across Microsoft 365, Teams, Copilot, and the entire, AI movement. Dan, it's great to have you today with us on the Tech Bytes episode.
Thanks for having me, Saeed. This is great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, Dan, I would start off, I've briefly introduced yourself, but I would want to know that, who is Dan Rey behind the resume or behind the professional profile. Tell us more about yourself. How's been your life journey like, and how did you reach to today where you are?
Yeah, great question. So I started as a service desk employee at a company in the Chicagoland area and got my taste for IT out of supporting people on a regular basis. I had about 150 users, if you will, when I started, and I over 5 years had over 1,000 users of network communications and using Windows and using software that we still use today. And from there, I moved into consulting, and then from consulting, I moved into training. I've been a Microsoft certified trainer for 25 years. This year, I've decided to go for the alumni because I'm not actively training as I have in the past. But that's kind of where my journey has taken me: full-time roles, consulting roles, training roles. And most currently, I'm back into a full-time technical analyst role.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And other than the professional journey that you've had, anything you would want to share which is more about you as a person, your hobbies, what do you like to do in your free time, and how sort of, that defines your personality.
Yeah, so I grew up enjoying bike riding. I still bike ride. I bike ride to work almost every day. Today is like maybe 3 degrees Fahrenheit, so I'm
Yeah,
not going to be out on a bike today. But if it's
of
above,
course.
I'd say probably 20 degrees. I'll bundle up and I'll ride for a mile or two. And then I enjoy swimming and I enjoy pickleball. I used to play tennis. I discovered pickleball about 5 years ago.
Uh,
So those are
right.
my
That's
my hobbies, if you will.
that's great. Good to know that, you're keeping up on the physical activity side of things as well. That's very important. So Dan, in your entire professional career, you've got so much experience, and you've been around building the community as well. You've seen this AI movement firsthand, coming, right in front of your eyes, and how it has evolved and grown over time. What is your take on that, and how do you think, where do you think right now AI, the entire movement is in its entire, life journey?
Yeah. So when I started, artificial intelligence showed up in a lot of the office applications in what I'd call maybe subtle ways. Like PowerPoint got a design feature that helped you with, based on the words that you put into a PowerPoint slide, it came up with suggestions of maybe graphics or backgrounds or potentially videos. And these were all precursors to what we now know as Copilot for Microsoft 365. So whether it was
Agree.
Excel figuring out patterns, hey, you're trying to put in the quarters of a year. Let me help you fill out the rest of those so you don't have to type them all in. Or it looks like you're typing months. Let's do that. There's a feature in Excel called flash fill, which looks for those patterns. So instead of having to know the formulas for taking first and last names and separating those out into separate columns, flash fill figures out the pattern. Oh, you're trying to get the first name. And it can then just suggest, you want to put the first name of everybody in column A, in column B. And those are early examples of what now Copilot can do on a much deeper scale than just separating or concatenating. If I have first name and then a separate column with last name, you could do the reverse. I could tell it without having to write any formula, just create another column and put the first name and the last name together. So we have a lot of those types of things as maybe the starting point for this AI journey. Copilot really took that and gave it a lot more context of my corporate data, and the ability to do much more than just create one slide with maybe a pretty background or something appropriate for the words that I used on a slide.
Right. So, we've seen that in this entire journey, it has taken, so Copilot has taken the entire AI movement to the next level. We should say that. Since we're talking about Copilot, and we've seen how Copilot has grown in this journey as well as a tool, per se. Um, I've seen that in many organizations, once they have, taken Copilot and they've, licensed and enabled it sort of, for their workforce. Um, Sometimes we can see that, the usage remains inconsistent. So in the real world, what do you think actually happens after Copilot goes live for these organizations, and why aren't they able to sort of, let's say, keep up with it?
Well, I'd say the one thing about Copilot, unlike Office or Windows in the past, is it's changing so rapidly, Said. So when you think
Hmm.
about Windows as an example, Windows 10 was out in the marketplace for 6 to 7 years before even Windows
Yeah,
11 was announced. And then
agreed.
Windows 11 has been out for several years. When you think about Copilot, Copilot started with a lot of functionality, but then has morphed in different ways over time in a much more rapid fashion than something like Windows or even the Office applications in the past has. So I think one thing at the beginning of the Copilot journey was figuring out, do you even have access to Copilot? And then if you had access to Copilot, it didn't necessarily bring it to the forefront. You had to still kind of figure out where it was on the ribbon, tell it to do something. And then Microsoft has gotten a lot of feedback and made adjustments based on that feedback that they've received. And the interface has changed, and maybe how you interact with Copilot has changed over the 2 to 3 years that I've been using it. Um, the the interface is one thing, and then the output is the other thing. Figuring out, how do I get output? A lot of times we're taught in business communications to be as concise as possible. So if I just ask it to write a weekly report of my activities, it could pull maybe from my calendar and decide how to put that information together. But if I don't tell it that I'd like that as a table, or that I'd like percentages of how I've used my time in the past week based on my calendar, I'm not giving it enough context to come up with like an accurate portrayal of what I did in a previous week or month.
Right, right. And Dan, so we've seen that, recently Microsoft's Ignite conference happened, and in the keynote speech, they spoke about the entire concept of the frontier organization now, and how work IQ and foundry IQ and all of those things are coming in. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so the idea of what we used to call betas, or preview features in Microsoft Azure, have really evolved, or there's a new term, if you will, for where some of those newer capabilities that Microsoft and customers are exploring. And so those frontier features a lot of times let you look at what Microsoft might be ideating on. So
Hmm.
what if Copilot could do this, or what if we had a feature that did that? And the warning that Microsoft gives on a lot of those things is similar to a preview feature, or maybe a beta operating system, where there might have been something in a version of Windows that worked a certain way, or a version of Office applications that Microsoft was working on. And maybe the final version works a little differently, maybe based on feedback, they made some adjustments. I've seen that in a lot of the Office applications and even Windows features over the years. We're seeing the same thing with these frontier features. We're seeing Microsoft introduce something, getting feedback on how it works, getting feedback on how it might work better, and then deciding, should this be a standalone feature? Should this maybe be folded into something else? Designer is a perfect example from my perspective of something that was originally introduced within PowerPoint, but then became a service that was one of the very first to use DALL-E 3. And designer.microsoft.com continues to be free for creating images, but obviously we've seen that bring itself into Copilot, and those models, if you will, were part of ChatGTP.
Agreed. And Dan, so this is very interesting, but that you've been training a lot of, professionals for all these years now, and, especially on, on Copilot and its related features. What's the real difference between having, access to a feature like Copilot and actually forming a Copilot-driven work habit that sticks for a longer run?
Yeah, great question. We just had a couple challenges from one of our leaders last week. One of them was to talk about creating a podcast. So thinking about a podcast and thinking about, what would I talk about on a podcast? How long should a podcast be? This just came out, this invite came out right after that challenge, and is another one of those opportunities for me to really think through, what does a podcast look like, feel like, and how much of this would be consumable with or without the video, right? Because if you're just doing
Right.
audio, if I'm driving, it's a totally different experience than if I can see somebody, whether they're demoing
Yeah.
or just talking to each other. So thinking about those kind of things, the realization I had after maybe coming up with like 10 bullet points on my own was, why am I trying to do this on my own? Why don't I ask Copilot to help me with what would a great tech related podcast for my company look like? And because it's in my company, it was able to surface, here's other examples of podcasts that have been done before you. So I have examples of length and content and everything else to go upon and to, ideate on, as opposed to just what I can think of in my head. That's been a real game changer, is remembering that it's there and then thinking about involving it early in the process, as opposed to, when I've already decided it's going to be a 45-minute podcast and I'm going to host it and I'm just going to, figure out what to talk about for 45 minutes, that type of thing.
Agreed, and then I think there's a lot of importance that goes into training for these features as well, because in the field what we experience with customers is that as an organization we also offer, whenever we're going for these Copilot services for our customers, we offer them that once that you've implemented Copilot, you've bought the license and you've enabled it for your workforce, it's very important for them to be trained on it as well. And I think that's something which you can also lay some importance on, that training your people for the right use of these Copilot features also adds a lot to the overall impact that it can produce for the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, even something as simple as an organizational asset library. So Copilot, just like a new employee, doesn't know where your assets are from a standpoint of fonts, colors, um, things that your marketing group might have come up with and set up as
Yeah.
best practices. So similar to onboarding a new employee, Copilot needs to be onboarded into these things. If you don't give it an organizational asset library, there used to be a trick in PowerPoint to open a previous PowerPoint, so Copilot would know, this is the font, these are the colors, this is the theme I should use when I'm creating a new PowerPoint. Well, with an organization asset library, you're giving Copilot almost like that onboarding
Yeah.
documentation of, here's what something should look like that's created with it. So training not only needs to happen, but Saeed, it's really important that it happen multiple times, because this, like I said, is changing so rapidly. The way it works this week may or may not be the way it works next month.
Next week, yeah, agree. Absolutely. And so we when we so our company focuses mostly on the mid market and the SMB segment. And there, the leaders of those organizations, they often ask a simple question, and they ask us, how do I know Copilot is working? So what are the right productivity or outcome signals that, these organizations can look for beyond the surface level usage metrics that we might have? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a great point. Um, Enabling somebody with a license only becomes valuable if they're using it. So the metrics that we're getting from things like Copilot have been um, becoming more available through things like the admin centers. One thing that I always look for are the use cases that you can share with other people. So
Mm,
sometimes we're going to get those metrics from something like an admin dashboard. But for example, I was up in Ottawa, Canada, probably a year and a half ago, and I realized because of the weather, we had 60 people registered for a Microsoft fundamentals course, and
right.
about 15 had trickled in by the time I was starting the course. I had questions for everybody, like who had taken a Microsoft exam before, because it was basically exam prep.
Yeah.
What type of experience had they had? Had they taken one before? Have they taken this one? Um, what other types of questions might they have? A lot of things that I wanted to gather. And what I realized was Microsoft Forms with Copilot, instead of having to take all those ideations and write the questions for each and every one, I was able to just prompt Copilot on these are the types of things I want to ask everybody. And very quickly in front of the audience, come up with the questions that I wanted to ask, create a QR code, put that into my slides so that at breaks and by lunchtime, when probably 40 to 45 people had arrived, I was able to give them all quickly a survey and gather those statistics on, 2/3 of my audience hadn't taken a Microsoft exam before. So not only am I preparing them for an exam with the kind of questions, but I need to make sure they understand what that exam experience looks like, whether you take it at an exam center or a Microsoft partner, or whether you take it online as an online proctored experience.
Right,
So
right.
I'd say
Agreed.
figuring out
And
what some of those stories are would be a real key.
absolutely. And I think, as people, progress in this entire journey of the AI usage, I think, as it matures, people will understand as to what, metrics are the real indicators of its productivity and its impact on the overall organization as well. So Dan, you've been very active on the community, end of things. We've already spoken about that. So my next question revolves around that. I would want you to sort of, tell us more about the MVP program and the entire community engagement that you're involved in, the Microsoft Speakers Hub, that we spoke about earlier as well. So, your take on all of these things, where they are in their journeys right now, and what is the importance of this community-led learning? Would want to sort of, for you to shed some light on this.
Yeah. About 12 years ago, we started a Microsoft Midwest Toastmasters group. So, public speaking related, nonprofit, worldwide. And we had a chapter at Microsoft in the Chicagoland area. That actually morphed into what became the Microsoft Speakers Club and now Microsoft Speakers Hub. And so
Right.
it was a community led focus on communication skills and public speaking. What we realized was, Saeed, similar to your time zone being at least complementary to mine, we were reaching people in areas where something for the United States or for the Americas wasn't necessarily a good time for somebody over in Bahrain or Israel or Australia, Japan,
Agreed.
etc. So we came up with ways in that community for people to contribute that didn't require coordinating time zones, figuring out, with this podcast, for example, it's around lunchtime, my time, it's around mid-morning, your time. Much
Yeah.
more easy to figure out. But if I'm figuring out somebody's evening versus my afternoon, I might still be working at that time. There might be a work emergency that comes up that pulls me away from something. So figuring out a lot of those things was my start in the community. And then about 4 years ago, I actually was awarded the Microsoft MVP. What I think is lost in the most valuable professional journey for many people is that I was nominated for the MVP 3 other times, and I did not receive that award. So a lot of people just see from a community posting perspective, hey, I'm honored and humbled to get this award from Microsoft. And sometimes there isn't a long journey. Sometimes it's, I'm the best new artist. I just, started my journey in the community and I've been awarded. And then other people are getting kind of like a lifetime achievement or after 7 long years, I've reached this award from Microsoft. And so, the community involvement is important, but then also making sure that you understand that that journey looks different for every person. And unlike some other awards where maybe if you release a movie or an album or something related to the category, you're in consideration. With the MVP, if you're not nominated, you're not even part of the nominees that they can consider. So it might be like other examples of something where you have to make sure that you are well known, that you are connected, but that you're also nominated to be considered even for the award. And then even if you've been nominated, you may or may not get it the first time around, but it helps you build those relationships. If the first time somebody looks at you like the best new artist and says, I've never heard of that actor or that musician, well, once you've got that nomination out there, maybe that helps people to recognize your name, your face, see you at different events, that type of thing.
Very interesting. And and I was also thinking that, this entire engagement thing, these speaker networks, the MVP program itself, and all the peer groups and, stuff like that, I'm sure that they also are playing a very important role in helping people and organizations actually adopt, these tools like Copilot effectively. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'd say that's, so there's the community aspect to the MVP, the most valuable professional, but there's also an award category and a technology. So my technology when I became an MVP was Teams. So I'm
Right.
really familiar with the different ways we could use this platform, including we could stream directly to LinkedIn. Most people
Mhm.
don't know that Teams can do that. But having that deep sense of expertise in the product, maybe in certain areas, Teams is a pretty wide tool or toolkit, if you will. Um, when Copilot came out, I leaned into Copilot because it was the latest, the greatest, the newest thing that Microsoft had. So for a year, I was a Teams plus Copilot MVP. And this year,
Right.
I've switched to Copilot and Surface. So I have Surface under Windows and Devices as a award category, and I have Copilot under Microsoft 365 as an award category.
That's nice. And I'm sure that, the synchronization and the cohesiveness that these communities and these programs have, I'm sure that organizations can also learn a lot from how these communities operate and, take some of those learnings and implement it to it in their models as well.
Yeah. As an MVP, a lot of times the places that you work, whether you're a consultant and you're working with a lot of different customers, or you're dedicated to one customer, you're bringing those experiences back to Microsoft. Um, there are features like Microsoft Places, which allow you to map out um, your organizational structure and physical locations, and then put that type of information into Microsoft Teams. Being able to provide not only feedback from a specific customer or customers helps Microsoft understands, oh, this might be something I'd want to understand, not only maybe the quadrant of a building, for instance, that somebody's sitting in, but the type of resources that are available at a desk. If you're hot desking, one of the things that comes up is, am I going to have two monitors at my desk? Am I going to have um, a phone available? Am I going to have, where am I going to print? All of those types of things. So Microsoft Places brings at least some of that knowledge of where you are and potentially what services are available. And there's obviously a roadmap and a product team that's working on Microsoft Places as an example.
Right. And Dan, very interesting point that I wanted to personally understand that myself as well. How does how does one become a Microsoft MVP? One question, and then the other one is that how does the let's say an year in the life of an MVP looks like? So let's say
Ah,
your life as an MVP, how does that go about?
it's one of those. Thanks for the question. It's a great one. And it's one that many people have. When you become an MVP, I mentioned that you get nominated. The
Yeah.
nomination is the easy part. All I do is I say, I know Saeed. I've known him for this long. He's shown up at these different things. I've witnessed his public speaking, his posts on LinkedIn. We've had some interactions. Maybe we've met in person or not, and I provide that information. That's about it.
Yeah.
What's involved in the nomination is the nominee has to document how they've showed up for the community in the last 12 months. And those 12 months are a moving window, right? So if we're talking January,
Right.
last December doesn't count. Like the
Oh,
2024 December doesn't count.
right.
2025 is just last month. But that moving window means that if you did something really significant for the community, but it's 18 months ago, Microsoft may not want to hear about that unless you're planning the next one. If it's a yearly conference, for instance, you could talk about here's the last time we did it, and we're already in preparation for this year's, conference. There is an MVP summit. It is typically in the month of March, and lately they've been telling us the week that it is, so that we're not guessing from a travel arrangement and other logistics.
Right.
And one thing that occurred to me about the MVP Summit is it is a natural week where thousands of MVPs congregate out in Redmond. And obviously, you have to be an MVP to attend the summit. But if you just happen to be in Redmond that week, there are all sorts of things and opportunities to meet people, to network, and to do things for the community that don't involve the Microsoft MVP Summit. So, for instance, last year, I contacted somebody at the Bellevue office of LinkedIn and I said, hey, we've got a conference coming up. Would it be okay to bring some MVPs over to tour LinkedIn's office? And LinkedIn said, sure, here's the dates and the times that work for us. However, just realize we do not provide any transportation and Microsoft shuttles don't run to the LinkedIn office location.
Right.
So we had additional logistics to think about. And what occurred to me last year was this didn't require me as an MVP to do that. It required a vehicle, a schedule of some sort about who wanted to come and where they were and a way to contact them, and then sticking to that schedule and communicating hey, here's where we're picking up and when we're leaving and when I'll have you back to the campus. And so this year, the plan is to do something around that with what will probably be called the Tech Influencer Summit. So the same week of the MVP Summit, putting together something for people that might have interest in the MVP. There's a student ambassador program if you're in college or full-time student, and just learning and networking around that. So the MVP, like uh, I'll call it nomination process, is one thing. The year in an MVP is every spring we provide information similar to what we did when we became an MVP. And that's what have you done the year that you have just completed. And so documenting all of the conferences and the ways that I've shown up for the community, calls like this, presentations, user groups, blog posts, anything else that I've done that's not part of my day job is considered part of it. There are some things that are kind of a gray area, like if you write a book, it's not supposed to be something that you're making money from, but if you write a book and it's related to your technology expertise, that can be considered as part of your contributions.
Right, very interesting. And I think I've always seen the MVP program as something very prestigious. And I'm sure that, a lot of our viewers and myself included, I'm also planning on starting my journey as well. So, might sort of, take more help from you on that.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's the
So
other thing
getting
you'll
back,
find is a lot of people will document their mentoring and their, the mentees that they have. So no matter where you are on the journey, there's typically somebody that's a little further behind, wondering, how do I get that first step? So figuring out how to do both, maybe find mentors. There have been people that have been MVPs for several years that I look up to and that I ask questions of. And then there's people that come to me asking, like how do I get considered for this, and what types of things would you recommend?
no,
So happy
absolutely.
to
I
help.
think you'd be absolutely. I'd love to take you in as my mentor because, like I've said, I've been very inspired by all the work that you've done so far. It's very motivational. And also, I was thinking, coming back to the entire Copilot conversation that we were sort of, having. Where do you think that Copilot delivers the fastest wins for any organization? Based on what you're seeing today, in the trainings and the conversations, which roles, which workflows do you think see the fastest or most visible value from Copilot? And sort of, and also like on the contrary, where do organizations often overestimate the impact of a tool like Copilot?
Yeah. So I think the more your job has become overwhelming, the more that Copilot can help. So if
Right.
if your job entails something, 9 to 5, where you don't have a lot of overlapping tasks, you're not challenged in ways that you don't have enough time to do your job. The higher up you are in an organization, or the longer you've been at an organization, those are two indications that I have been seeing from my both experience and um, examples from the community of places where I have 4 meetings on my calendar. Which ones do I actually give my attention to, or send a delegate to if I'm in a management role? Which ones can I just get a summary of because they're all overlapping? And Copilot, with things like facilitator for meetings and even Copilot from a transcript, can pull things like, where was I mentioned? What are the action items that came out of this meeting? And things that allow you very quickly and easily, or somebody that supports you if you have an executive assistant or somebody assisting you with that busy schedule and all of those um, competing, you know, uh, projects for your time, or meetings that want your attention. You have the ability to really use the tool to decipher what's happened when you go on vacation for a week. We've all related to, or can relate to the fact that the longer you take vacation, the more that's piled up when you've been gone that you need to catch up on very quickly. So being able
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
use something like Copilot to say, summarize the action items that I might have in my email and put those into 3 buckets, high priority and to low priority. And in some meetings, meeting rooms, a lot of times from Copilot, again, it's that onboarded. Maybe I need to give it some guidance. If you're in a meeting room that doesn't have the capability of voice isolate, or not voice isolation, but the voice profile, so it can figure out if it's you or me, Saeed, that's talking. If we're in a conference room using Teams, it just says the conference room asked this question and the
Right.
conference room provided this update. So things like having that information where it understands the person speaking is super important for Copilot to do its job effectively.
Agreed. And on the contrary, where do you think that organizations overestimate the impact that, something like Copilot can give them?
I That's a great question. I think in certain situations you have to figure out which job roles might be good fits for Copilot. So
Right.
obviously something where I've got the ability to maybe summarize things that are overwhelming, um, where I have tasks that maybe I'm struggling with, and I need that kind of that guidance or that first, ideation on something. Even in a junior role, if I can have Copilot do something like summarize or create a table, or maybe reimagine data in a different way, it can become super helpful for that role. But the higher up you are in the organization, or the longer you've been at an organization, those are two indications that I've seen of where you might really get the bang for those licenses. The other thing I've noticed is if you start with licenses, you can move those licenses around. So if I give those to maybe the highest executives in a company, that might not be the best role because they're already overwhelmed and they may or may not have bandwidth to learn this new tool. If I go one level below them to their executive assistants and sponsors and people that are supporting those busy executives, those people might benefit from being able to use this to summarize 2 or 3 executives, for example, that they're supporting.
Right. And Dan, so in one of our recent conversations, this point came up, and it was very interesting, and I would love to sort of, take your opinion on it as well. That so when we talk about, so in the entire journey of Copilot and the improvisation of AI comes the concept of agentic AI, which is very something that everyone wants to jump on that bandwagon these days, right? So when you talk about this agentic AI concept and talking about creating those Copilot agents for different tasks or different things that an organization might want to do, um, a lot of time what I've seen is that organizations get a little reluctant from the governance and the compliance end of things. So, in your experience, what have you seen in this context? And is that reluctance justified, or is that something that organizations need to have a better context of? And there's no such harm in implementing these agents for whatever task that the companies want them to do.
Yeah, I'd say the one thing that comes back to governance and compliance is that this time, instead of a tool that people are just going to disable, we have a tool that people want to use. And so we have to have that conversation about, are things properly secured and is access correct in a company? So these tools do have the potential of showing something that I have access to, but I've never even looked at or known was in my company. But instead
Yeah.
of just, well, we should make sure nobody knows about it, in this case, we have the ability to say, hey, if that's a confidential document, maybe it should be marked as internal only, or maybe it should be marked with the appropriate permissions so somebody doesn't just find it. Delve was the first example I ever saw of that. And Delve had the ability to take signals like the fact that we may be communicating and say, hey, did you know Saeed's working on, the Q4 plan or, next year's budget or something else that I shouldn't have access to. If it's properly secured, I don't have access to that and Delve wouldn't have brought it up. But at the time, that first wake up call that most companies got, they said, well, how do we turn off Delve? We just don't want to use it. We're not going to address the issue of security, compliance, or permissions. This time, we have a tool that we want to use. So the answer could be, well, just turn it off. And
Yeah.
Copilot does have the ability for you just to say, you know what? I don't have time to go through all the HR or all of the sales data to figure out if it has been correctly secured and permissioned. You can just tell Copilot, similar to like a role in a company, you don't have access to this data. So don't surface information from an area where I might have that compliance or that concern. It's either on or off. So, the better way to address that is to address the security and compliance concerns and things like labels. The best time to label a document is at the time of creation. It's a lot of work to go back through shares, files, folders, SharePoint, other types of things to say, here's, where confidential information exists. But if I'm working on something that's confidential, it's likely that at some point it won't be confidential. So even putting those
Yeah.
labels on to begin with, and then deciding, when does this become public knowledge or when is this finalized?
Agreed. Agreed. So, Dan, last question. If you had to give like, one piece of advice to any market leader who wants Copilot to deliver real value in, let's say, a 90-day plan, what should they focus on first?
I would say meetings and email. Those are the two things that I've seen from a leader's perspective that
Right.
they can relate to being inundated with and being overwhelmed by. If you focus on the fact that I'm receiving more email that I can deal with, and I'm being invited to participate in more meetings than I have bandwidth for, and one's going to suffer. If I spend the time reading my email, I'm not getting to the meetings. And if I spend all my time in meetings, I don't have time to deal with email. I'd say those two methods of communication are two quick wins for anybody at a certain level of seniority or time in an organization.
Right, right, right. So Dan, that was very insightful. Not about where AI is heading someday, but how organizations can make Copilot work today. And your perspectives on the habits, the community, the adoption brings a layer of practicality, and that's very essential as more organizations move from expectations and experimentations to actual execution of these AI tools. Thank you so much for joining us today on Tech Bytes, Dan, for all the work that you continue to do for the Microsoft community. Kudos for you.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. And I'm glad we were able to get this scheduled and executed. It's great to, spend some time with you, and good luck on your journey. I'm looking forward to spending more time talking about it.
Absolutely, Dan. Thank you so much.